our student debt is now more than $1 trillion, and there's a lot of speculation as to what has caused such a hike in tuition costs. Excessive salaries for administrative positions, funding fancy new sports centers, or even increase in enrollment. And the truth is, there are a variety of factors that have caused a steady rise since the days our parents went to school. But there is an even more recent factor that directly correlates to this drastic upsurge, the Great Recession. Most of us remember what happened back in 2008. It had something to do with short-sighted decisions regarding interest rates and lending, and ultimately, Americans had to foot the bill. Because so many Americans were newly unemployed after the recession, states were bringing in less income and sales tax revenue, two major sources of funding for education. And as a result, states had to make decisions about where to put their now limited revenue. Unfortunately for us, these decisions played out to be major budget cuts, with funding for higher education being one that was hit pretty hard. We bring up the Great Recession and interest rates to make an important comparison that is gravely affecting the student loan issue. Let's take a look at what interest rates are for students versus big companies. Now, let's put these numbers into a much more comprehensible, tangible example. The average student loan debt is $30,000. So let's say we have a $30,000 loan to be paid off in 20 years. How much extra would a student have to pay in total accrued interest versus a major corporation? However, these totals for student loans are actually incorrect. They're technically even higher. Here's why. A standard loan with a typical repayment plan like the one our calculator measured assumes that we start making payments the next day. But student loans work differently. Payments are usually deferred while in school, yet the interest still accrues, ultimately inflating the loan balance. So when it comes time to make payments for federal loans, they are about 17.2% higher than the original borrowed amount. For pursuing an education, you will pay more than double or even more than triple than a company would. This could have gone into getting a house or starting a new business, two major pillars that not only sustain our middle class, but make it thrive. And practically an entire generation won't be able to afford those because they got an education. There is something seriously wrong here. So how did we get to this point? Student loan interest rates have typically been higher than those for major companies. But why? Why did companies like Sallie Mae, which started out as a public program, privatize? To privatize has one major goal in mind: to make a profit. Is Sallie Mae, who owns 20% of that $1 trillion, profiting off our debt? It's worth noting that from 2008 to 2012, $16 million of Sallie Mae's budget was spent on lobbying against student loan reform. Lastly, let's discuss the shift in public opinion. Starting in the 1980s, education went from being a public good to a private commodity. You went to college so you could get rich. But in thinking this, we've lost sight of the fact that the benefits of education expand way beyond the individual who has the degree. These students become entrepreneurs who start local businesses, who hire local and invest in their local communities. The benefits are tenfold. Not to mention what access to education does for our nation as a whole. We innovate, we explore, we build, we teach, we find cures, we lead. After World War II, there was a major incentive to have all young Americans earn a high school diploma. Just a few decades later, that was achieved, making us the most educated country in the world. And what can we attribute to those golden years? The booming middle class, advancements in technology, and expansion in industry. This is no coincidence. The New York Times noted that in the 1970s, we were top dogs globally in getting a college degree. Today, we are 14th. Free education is surrounded by a stigma because nothing is ever free. And it's true, we as a nation would have to pay. But we ask you, even if you don't think education should be free, why are students being penalized with higher interest rates than those of corporate America? And if we could make just one more point, you are actually already paying for the lack of education through welfare and criminal justice, to name a few, and with Wall Street's mess-ups back in 2008, you had to pay even more. So what would you rather pay for? A prospering nation that gets us back on top, or a crippling one with increase in welfare and crime and corruption? Who is the better investment? We won't pretend to know the answers on how to fix this, but we do hope that through this platform, we can start the discussion, brainstorm, and finally find the solutions. It's time our nation invests in our youth. Unaffordable education is crippling our entire society, and we've really only seen just the tip of the iceberg. To our fellow young Americans, college-bound or not, this affects you, and your future is the better investment.
Education occurs when you break out of your conceptual comfort zone and you start experiencing different realities and experiences. But if the cost of higher education keeps rising compared to the socioeconomic gap between white people and people of color in this country, then we're essentially making colleges and higher education more white.
Hi, I'm Strith.
And I'm Kelsey.
And we're part of New York Students Rising, a statewide network of students fighting to defend public higher education and particularly the tuition hikes. SUNY has been raising our tuition $300 every single year for the last 5 years, and they're looking to renew the proposal so that it gets extended another 5 years.
Yep, Governor Cuomo announced that this year in his State of the State address. So we're calling on all students from all SUNY campuses to walk out with us on March 4th, next Friday at 12 p.m. to show Governor Cuomo that students will not stand for tuition increases any longer.
I've really had to sort of structure my entire life around making sure that I have enough money to make the monthly, pretty significant payments on the loans that I took out in order to attend. And so that's just limited really sort of everything to some extent, both in terms of the sort of work that I would do. It has made it impossible for me to do more. I work now for a nonprofit. It's made it impossible for me to do more missionary work or work where you're maybe not even paid basic salary, but can kind of give more of yourself. That was sort of what I had originally intended to do, but wasn't able to.
This is something that we fight for. It's not just for ourselves. We fight for a lot of students. Everyone has their own stories about how student debt affects them in different ways. Personally, as someone who's about to graduate in May, I've looked at my last 4 years and reflected upon it, and there's a lot of things I wish I could have done. I wish I had more time to do things. I wish I had, possibly been able to afford to take summer classes or even an extra semester to pursue a second degree that I was interested in. But also, I'm now looking at what it means to graduate and what it means when May comes. And at this point, I'm already starting to apply for jobs because I really just need any job, and I know I'm just going to take whatever job comes because I need to start working as soon as possible and saving up so that in 6 months when my loans start coming in, I'll have at least some money to start paying for them before, extra interest adds up. So that's kind of how student debt has affected me in some ways.
Yeah, I think it's going to be something that I'm going to have to take a lot more time planning long term, like how I'll be paying off slowly over the course of years to pay my loans back. So I think just planning a lot in advance and thinking about how I'll be budgeting for years when I probably wouldn't have had to think about that far in advance had I not taken all the loans out.
Yeah, that's very true for me as well. I'm currently $30,000 in debt, and I actually want to go into the nonprofit sector of organizational work. And for me, I'm thinking of my job in the next coming months, and I'm not thinking I'm going to go into one of those fields. I'm thinking I have to go into a field where I might not want to as much because I need to get the job that's going to pay more in order to pay those loan bills that are going to come my way. If I didn't have all that debt, racked up, then I may be able to have a little more flexibility and not be worrying about a job that's not going to pay as much. But until that time comes, I have to get the job that I don't want as much.
So that's why we're fighting, amongst other people's stories as well.
Welcome to our first activist spotlight with Dhia Fani from Buku Kami. She came all the way from Indonesia to New York not specifically to interview with our turn, but we're lucky enough to have her here, and we're really excited to hear a little bit about activism and what Buku Kami does. So let's jump right in and talk about what the mission of Buku Kami is.
Yes, Buku Kami offers handmade notebooks made from 100% sustainable materials, but crafted by women survivors of human trafficking.
Okay, and what is the translation of Buku Kami?
Buku Kami means our book in Bahasa Indonesia. We had thought about how we wanted the books to be a representation of our collective mission, that we want to create a new story as a collective, so for the women and also for the customers who are buying the notebooks.
So how did you get involved with this project?
Yeah, one time I was just meeting up with a couple of friends during my summertime. I was interning in Jakarta, so we were just talking about what we did, what we were doing. We were all college students, and a couple of them brought up their volunteering activities in one of this shelter for survivors of human trafficking. And so I was very curious about that topic too. And they talked about how it's very difficult for the women to get out of the human trafficking cycle because it's just hard to do that. And most of the women only have 7 years of education, which means they don't have the skill set to look for jobs. And they're paid very cheaply in the sex trafficking industry. It's only $1 per sex transaction.
Wow.
So that in itself already shows how severe the situation that they are in. And we talked about, how do we help them really? What's the more sustainable way of doing it? And so that's really where the project came in, because we thought about the kind of skill set and the kind of opportunities that they can have in order to quit from this cycle.
So it seems like sustainability is really important to Buku Kami. Sustainability in that you use recyclable goods, and also sustainability in that you're giving women a skill set that can be applied outside of Buku Kami. So can you talk a little bit about what sustainability means to you and to the project, and how that was really integrated at the beginning?
Yeah, I think I would give credits in terms of the sustainability aspect of the project to Carlos, who's also the founder of this project, because he's very passionate about the environment and the sustainability of the things that he does. And so he wanted to bring in the environmental aspect in it, in the materials, but that's also the beginning of our thought to try to make sure that everything in the business is sustainable, including how do we create the skill that can be brought with the women regardless of what they do. How can we make sure that the packaging is sustainable? I think that's really important these days, especially when you know that we waste a lot. I mean, our society just wastes tons and tons of stuff every single day, and it's good to try to be mindful about
And be conscious.
Yeah.
So what does advocacy and being an activist mean to you?
I think being an activist is simply asking the questions and being an observant of the things that happen in society. When human trafficking and prostitutions happen around me, especially in Jakarta or in the other areas that I've observed, knowing that these women are only paid $1 to $5 per sex transaction just doesn't make sense, right? And you start wanting to do something about that. For my friends, for example, they don't understand why we're wasting so much. And I also don't understand why we're wasting so much, why we cut down trees to make papers for our notebooks. I don't think that's necessary either, and there must be a way to do something better for us and for our society. And so when I begin asking those questions, I become more active and more aware of the things that we can do, and that's where I begin, I guess. And that's what activism means to me, is when you start asking questions and you want to be a part of the answers to those questions.
So what is the future for Buku Kami?
In regards to the women, for example, we want to have more programs for them and have partnerships with educational institutions, for example, where the women can take courses that they want. Obviously, they might not be just interested in notebook making. Some of them are interested in cooking. Some of them want to get certifications. So we want to allow different things for them. We also want to do more partnership with organizations around the world just to gain more awareness in human trafficking. because it's not spoken enough. We
Absolutely.
want to push it,
Yeah, absolutely. Education is a huge part. So what advice would you give to a young activist or someone who is looking to get involved with social change and they see an issue that they want to help out with or make an impact with, but they just don't know how, because it can be kind of daunting.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I've been there too.
Yeah.
So I think what you have to do is just to begin. When you're interested in one issue, just start looking up into it and really paying attention to that issue. And I think once you begin, other things will follow.
Absolutely.
For example, you just do it and then you learn about it and then you make mistakes and you improve yourself, or you meet people. Like just now, I'm meeting you guys because of Buku Kami.
Yeah.
I never really thought about that before.
Amazing.
But it's always going to follow. If it's it's kind of like a cycle. Like once you're into it, you'll just keep
It
moving.
just follows, yeah, and it's really about building community and
Yeah.
making all of those connections. It's a really beautiful thing. So how can someone go about buying a notebook from Buku Kami?
I'd say check our Instagram because that's where we do a lot of the campaigns and awareness building and discussions. So our Instagram is at buku.kami.project.
Okay.
And we also have a website, let's say a Facebook page.
Sure.
That's also Buku Kami.
Okay.
We're building our website, but it will be on www.bukukami.org.
Okay, great. Yeah, we'll link to it all below in the video, guys. And thanks for joining us, and thank you
Thank
for
you,
being
guys.
here. This
Thank
was
you.
amazing.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, absolutely. Yay, activism.